Hi, everybody. Um, so if you're here to discuss release, then you're in the right place. If you're not, then feel free. Oh. Okay. So we're here to discuss release, and I kind of want to keep it as an open discussion with no, just kind of like no clear topics, whatever is on people's mind. And we have a mic out there for people to raise their topics. Yeah. So some of the things that I want to hopefully be able to discuss in this meeting is any updates to the milestones. And also, we want to discuss how we want to release non-Karaf features as well. And how better to track weather items and any updates to the release templates. For the release milestones, there were some discussion during the Beryllium timeframe about adding some new requirements. One of them is adding a upgradability requirements for per project, defining whether or not they've tested upgradability from a previous release. There were also some discussion about adding some documentation requirements for projects to generate Maven sites with JavaDocs and REST APIs. And there were also discussion about adding a CLM requirement for projects to at least review and acknowledge whatever items are in their CLM report. And also some discussion about enforcing functionality freeze or code freeze more strictly during a release. And possibly a longer RC timeframe. So these were the items that were brought up in the Beryllium release notes. Beryllium simultaneous release plan lessons learned section. So again, this is more of an open discussion. So any kind of like anyone in the crowd want to chime in? Oh, yeah.
API part?
Could you repeat your question so that, because I think the session is being recorded, right?
Okay. So personally, I'm interested in the requirements about JavaDocs and REST API. Actually, VTN project has already, generated JavaDocs automatically into Jenkins, but I'm not sure. First of all, is there any way to automatically generate REST API for the REST-conf? I mean, REST API generated by Young model. I'm not sure there's a way at this time.
I believe that in Beryllium there were actually a couple of projects, including Yang tools, right? Yang tools that were at least generating a Maven site with their JavaDocs and REST APIs.
Yeah. It's just JavaDoc API. Oh. Yeah. So currently, our ODL parents configured, if you have the right POM sections in your project POM, it'll automatically generate Maven sites as well as JavaDoc API. It does not include the REST API part, and that's something we still need to figure out. And the documentation team has been trying to find some cycles to look into getting that out, and also moving it out of controller too, right? Because like right now, if you run the controller, there's REST API using some, I think it's like a Swagger framework or something.
Yeah, Swagger.
That starts up.
Swagger UI.
Yeah, and it's not so useful that you have to have a controller running to be able to look at that. So one of the things we want to do is be able to host that same API in Nexus, but that's the part we haven't figured out yet.
Okay.
The problem with the controller is that the API gets automatically generated with then this whole kind of architecture the APIs get generated automatically out of the YAML models. And you don't know these APIs until you actually run the controller. So that's why most of the people, they point to the Swagger application or this kind of tool that are runtime tools in order to document or understand what is your API. But Java Docs is very possible. If it is just Java Docs, you can do that today through the Maven site. I think we need some tooling in general, not just for, but I'm investigating that because of the way we are doing in OpenDaylight, that everything is YAML model, and then you don't know the API until you build and run. If there is some tooling, I believe there must be something that by reading the YAML model, it auto-generate the documentation that you need. Read YAML model and then say, okay, these are all my possible methods, and generate automatically some sort of documentation. That would be very useful, and I believe there must be something out there at these days that it can do that. No, what I'm looking is at a tool that you can input a YAML model and automatically generate documentation out of it, like.
There's already actually within a project now automatically generate some document which is based on YAML model.
So how do you do that now? You said.
I'm not sure about it. In Jenkins John, I think YAML tools or MVC, I'm not sure, but whatever there is a tool available in OpenDaylight, so within a project automatically generated some document based on YAML model.
Okay. But for that, you need to run the controller, or how do you do that today? You need to build at least the controller, no? You need to build the controller, or how this information is getting generated.
Sorry, I'm not sure about my colleagues. But my point, my original point is that as well as this document for YAML models, actually this document to like explanation for RPC or data model, but as well as in addition to that, we need a kind of REST API document for end user.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking. The one I'm thinking is for the user, documenting the REST API. Sorry, yeah, I was not clear there. The REST API is the one that is more tricky today. And I believe there must be something out there or internally, or I don't know, something. Yeah, I will ask, actually. Yeah, it's a lot of try, no? When someone writes a right model, you guess what is the rest that you need to use, and then you try here and there until you make it work. It should be some way that you can do that more automatic.
So, I mean, like, are you talking about, because right now we can generate the RESTconf APIs through the Swagger UI, right? So are you saying about generating that without building all of controller, without running controller?
Today, when I ask people how you figure out what kind of REST kind of body you need to build for this particular application the first time, no? But most of the people say, I use Swagger to figure out, or I use there is a component in the GUI, the Jan UI. There is something called Jan UI. But both solutions require that you have your controller running. So you already deploy your REST API, and either the Swagger or the Jan UI is going to go in your run controller and then figure out what are the APIs. I mean, the REST, the kind of format, the JSON that you need to build, and that kind of things. And I wonder if there is a way, more simple to do this. Like instead of running the controller, you just pass some kind of a script or tooling on the YAML model and then automatically see the REST. But my point is maybe it's not that easy because all this REST is getting generated automatically by the YAML tools project, which we had discussion the other day. The YAML tools try to be as much a standard as possible. There is some kind of a standard on how to build REST out of YAML model. But the standard is quite, is sometimes open to interpretation, and different people interpret different things. So maybe the parser that we are using is not totally, everybody use that kind of parsing. So that makes me think as well that maybe if we use some tooling, it might not work all the way straight.
Yeah. And whatever tooling we use, and whatever it generates, we should publish into the Maven sites.
But something we could add the young tools people that are building the parser. Why don't you do a parser that is not runtime? That is like something like I give you a a YAM model, you do something with that, and then you give me a samples, documentation, some sort of documentation that I can use. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, actually, are you talking about the API docs, the one that shows up in the UI?
Yeah,
that
the
one
API
is,
docs.
I believe that one is inside the netconf project.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we would actually have to ask them if we can extract that
Extract that piece, right?
and
Extract that piece.
and have it so that projects we can build this and then upload it to the Maven site.
Yeah, these ideas, I think they are useful. Definitely.
I'm not sure if it's doable in Boron, but I think it will be very valuable to Boron and very valuable to our end users as well.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Actually, I have one question. So within project has already, using generating a Maven site, including Java doc, I think. So, I mean, where should we put documents? I mean, is it okay to put documents into Jenkins site, or should we put documents in Nexus repository?
No, so
Is there any, preferred way?
Yeah, so using Maven sites, you can put any static HTML you want. So if you activate Maven sites for your project, and then you put, like, let's say you want to generate static HTML somewhere else, and you could copy that into the right spot in your build, and it'll upload it to Nexus for you. You shouldn't be putting your docs, like I think when you say Jenkins sites, you're probably thinking like archiving docs in Jenkins.
Yeah.
Right. No, so you definitely don't want to do that. We don't want to use Jenkins as a place for people to go and look for docs. You should be pushing them all to Nexus.
Or should we put it into Nexus?
Yes. And if you follow the documentation on how to activate a Maven site for your project, that's where it pushes your docs. And one of the things it can do too is if you want to get fancy and make your own like web page, like static web page, you can also do that as well using Maven sites. Yeah.
So there is some documentation he wrote. You search in the wiki for. There is some available documentation in the wiki for how to build a Maven site. We haven't tried in integration yet. We wanted to do it. But yeah, this release probably we're going to try as well because we have some dynamic content based on robot libraries that we want to publish. And I think the Maven site is going to be useful for us.
and I believe there's a couple of projects who are already doing that we can use as an example.
Yeah.
Right? Including, I believe Yangtools was one of them, right? Or do we know the list?
I actually just pulled it up. So I've currently got listed for in Nexus the following sites. I've got Docs, MDSal, ODL Parent, OpenDove, which is an old design. We've got Auto Release, and we've got Builder, and we've got Yangtools.
Okay. OpenDove? How did that happen?
That happened because when OpenDove was still an active project, they were trying to get Maven sites working. And so they were actually our initial pilot of doing Maven sites of any form or fashion.
Okay. Great. Are there any other release milestones that I guess we should update or add new requirements to in the Boron release, assuming that we don't do the fast-paced one?
So one of the things I realized with the existing release milestone is that with the existing cadence of 6 months, giving only, I think it's 4 weeks we are giving now, or maybe 5 weeks in the end to do all the testing and the release candidate and testing on that, it seems like short always. I don't know why. So I wonder if we were to get this 6 months model, whether we could extend a little bit the freezing the code, a little code freezing. Actually, I don't know exactly. What really think makes project to look at the testing is whenever we start generating the release candidates. It's not even that when you see the code freezing, the people are really freezing the code. Some of them at least. But definitely when you give a release candidate and you ask projects to test with the release candidate and that kind of things is where I see people really stop coding and then, try to test and then try to fix. So in the 6 months cadence, I think we might need some more time. And the reason is because you see, and some people saw as well, we were running very much in the last month. Like it was kind of quiet, or not quiet, but kind of steady state. Suddenly we got the release candidates and everybody was like running crazy, testing, fixing. I don't get enough time, working weekends. And I think, yeah, that's a little bit my impression that maybe there is something we can do about it. Like we don't need to run so much in the end. Of course, if we're gonna say we're gonna produce release candidates, start testing before means that there is less time for coding. But in the end, it's like, okay, maybe you don't need to get all the features or everything there for a release. It's better to get more tested, whatever you have done.
Yeah. So one discussion I had was possibly creating a pre-RC, but I mean, like, I'm not sure if that's going to be useful or not. But one person did this, suggest pre-RC at the code freeze time, so that we can say, well, all the projects technically are supposed to be at code freeze. And if we were to code freeze at this moment, this is what the RC would look like.
Yeah.
And then these are the projects that, and then because we generate the RC, it would generate the distribution test job. And then we can say, well, these are the projects that have been tested, and these are the failures that they had, and these are the projects that do not have any distribution tests at all. So even doing that at the code freeze time would kind of like extend the testing period. But this would be less formal than RC, where with RC we're actually actively getting projects to report and tracking it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not sure, because if we create something and nobody really is paying any attention or doing any tests, what is really the key today? What makes the project to really go and test? Like whenever you get a release candidate, whenever he asks you to report in the Excel sheet, or what is really the trigger today for people to really doing tests, stop coding and start doing testing and fixing, bug fixing, especially fixing bugs, in your experience? CSIT failures, but this can happen anytime, no? Like, I don't see that okay, there is a problem today that even if you have a system test running all the time, not everybody is looking at that. There must be a few exceptions. Maybe we had the exception in this table. But most of the people, they don't look at their system tests at all. So they start to look at exactly when they get a release candidate, and then we ask them, okay, report your failures. And you actually do very, very well this job. So you summarize all the failures there. And then the people need to go back and say, okay, this is failing. Oh, but it's okay. It's okay. It's just a test issue, or we test manually and it's okay. Yeah. This is for me when the people start to really look at the things. Before, very little. So one idea is to start, if possible, this process of creating release candidate and tracking project earlier. Of course, the problem with this is that it's more work on you, on the release people, that they need to start tracking project earlier. The second idea is the experimental. I don't know if you're going to set up here that kind of idea, but I think the experimental will help as well. Like, you cannot really force today project to do system tests or even have some quality or in the system test, unless our idea is to say, okay, a project by default is experimental, and unless you have some standards, like you have a minimal system test, you have this, you have that, you maintain your system test, you look at your system test sometimes so it's not red all the time. Unless we put some kind of requirements there, then you are not experimental anymore. Yeah. So we need to work on that, I think. And I talked to Phil as well, and I think that could start to creating the mindset that it's not only coding, I need to look a little bit at the quality and the test.
Well, the thing is with that, it's like to claim that your experimental should be voluntary, because that's how we've been doing it before.
Yeah.
But I think that if we have a new tag like production ready, that you have to demonstrate that yes, you've done some sort of system test, and it may not have to be as a part of OpenDaylight's CSIT infrastructure.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
You can, for some projects like that have their own lab set up in their own company, as long as you report those somewhere in a spreadsheet,
Yeah.
It also makes sense. And for production ready, you also need extensive documentation, because I know that in some projects, when you go to their user guide and the developer guide, it just says, oh, by the way, our project does this, and to do it, you install OpenDaylight, and that's it. And the documentation isn't enough for the end user to really use it in their production environment. The goal here is to be, the goal here is about user experience.
Totally.
Right? The end user needs to know if this feature can actually be used in their production environment, or the end user needs to know if this has not been thoroughly tested and they would be guinea pigs for this feature.
The only thing I was going to add there was when you mentioned third-party labs. People can hook into they can hook into Garrett and they can report through their own third-party labs, but that's on a patch-by-patch basis, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes yes, but sometimes some labs are very private in these companies, so they don't have any internet or they don't want anybody to, But even in that case, I agree. As long as we prepare some template like test case, pass, not pass, and they just fill the data for the test case that they're passing, I think I would be okay just to see a test report. I don't need to really, Well, something we could do is ask periodically report. I mean, you never know if they are copy pasting internally, but I mean, you are not the police here, so I don't know. But at least you can ask periodically some kind of reports, like you are doing some testing or something, right? Yeah. That's the only thing we can do.
And I agree. I agree with Andrew that ideally we want the projects to integrate with the Garrett triggers, right? And to do that, are any projects doing that right now?
No.
Okay.
No third-party labs.
Okay.
This has been something that's been asked of us off and on for the last actually pretty much since the time we started OpenDaylight. And I've told everybody every time they've asked me, just do this. They never do.
So ideally we would want that, but at a minimum, at a bare minimum, there has to be some sort of report either on a wiki or something to say, yes, I've tested it. These are the parts that I've tested, so that the end user at least gets some understanding of what is covered and what parts they're going to be guinea pigs for.
So one of the things I realized is not only the test, also documentation. Yeah, today we have only feature and stable feature, only two classification, 2 tiers, and that's not enough. And why it's not enough? Because all the requirements we put for stable are so high bar that today we don't have any stable, and let's see if the next release we have any stable feature at all. But still we need to distinguish between those that, okay, they are not stable, considered stable yet, but still they are doing proper tests, from those that are doing very weak tests, no documentation. Yeah, we need to make some distinguish there. So
the ones that are production ready.
Yeah.
So they're stable, but then for the ones that are not stable, we need to identify in the spectrum, are they production ready or are they experimental or?
We need to find a name. Production ready, people can think you need to be stable. Otherwise, I don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You said production ready, I thought stable.
Okay.
So that's my point. That can be mixed.
The production ready is a little bit of a. I would hesitate to use that term because it means different things to different people.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we still need to find we need to find the right flag, the right name for the flag.
So to be honest, I like experimental because people in general they don't like that. At least continuously on the releases. Like the first release I can be experimental because the first time I don't do very poor tests, no documentation. But if that happens the second release as a project, I see what I'm doing here. I mean, 2 releases and I still am experimental, or 3 releases still experimental. It's like there is some connotation there, like people don't like that very much.
Well, that's a good step.
Yeah. So for me, it's like I will somehow state that experimental is probably what we want to get by default. Like projects, if you don't prove otherwise, you're going to be experimental listed. And someday then I don't like experimental. I want to show something else. But then, okay, but show me. I mean, this is the way it is today. Other than because, I tell you, if we just keep it normal level, no feature, no documentation, no test, then most of the people are happy with that. I mean, I have a regular feature like everybody, no tagging. No, we need to really tag that way, I think, to get the mindset for people to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other suggestion that I heard was for the milestones, for the requirements to be feature focused rather than project focused. So I know that right now a lot of our question is, has this project done X, Y, and Z? When it's really, we should frame it as, has this feature done X, Y, and Z?
So
So-
there is always this question for whenever we talk about something in the release, is project related or feature related?
Yeah.
So for your point, most of the time is feature. Like, we don't care much about the project, but the feature itself. Is it stable, not stable, has all the documentation, not documentation? Most of the things that are release related are feature, not specifically projects. So for your point, yeah.
Right. So for example, I believe one of the questions is, has this project started system tests? When I think that we should reframe it as,
A feature.
has this top level feature
Yes,
started
totally
system
right.
tests? Because to pick on USC, we do have some features that we've started system tests for, but moving forward, we may introduce things like AMPQ or CLI channels for that. So maybe we
Yeah.
have not started for those features.
Yeah, so this will be maybe experimental in the first time or something. So yeah, absolutely agree with you. So we should update all the documentation for the release. Maybe instead of saying project, for some of the things, say features. Like make sure that these features. Yeah, I agree. And something we are missing, by the way, now that I'm thinking, we get all the projects to document their own feature silo thing, but we get very few people to work in, some kind of documentation across. Today, the only documentation that we do across is the Getting Started guide, which is basically, download the thing and then install some features. But hopefully, I don't know how we're going to start this effort in the community, but we need to produce some more solution documentation, like bringing more than one feature and then see. Of course, this is what I'm saying here is not easy because we need coordination and also some people that maybe work across projects. But today we are missing some of this stuff. For the Nila said the first day, we don't have a clear use case. Sometimes we don't have a clear use case because every project is working in silos. And we don't have really solution document or use case document where you bring different features to do something. So that's probably one of the things.
Do you see this as something that we document in our ASCII docs, or is this something that we document in a wiki? Or, I mean, like this is like a cross-project, cross-feature,
Yeah.
multi-feature.
Multi-feature kind of thing.
To achieve some particular use case.
Exactly,
So, for
yeah.
example, like a GPP SFC
Yeah.
or a NIC VTN renderer
Yes.
kind of thing.
Yeah, those things.
So are you recommending that we actually document it in our ASCII docs, or?
Well, why not? I mean, this is, I don't know, whatever is the normal way today, like ASCII doc or wikis if it is the normal thing. I don't know. But these things are pretty much missing my understanding because, and this is, and I don't know, use cases today go on that line, whatever involves more than one project, but also we can look at use cases, people that are using in the downstream. We can give some idea, no? For instance, if OpenFV is using GBP, SFC, this, that, we can build something similar and then document it better, the full solution. So whatever we are thinking that there is a use case or someone is using that for some reason, we could create the documentation for that.
All right, any other release milestones that people wanted to chime in on and comment? So the other thing that came up during the Beryllium discussion and will also affect Boron is the release of non-Karaf features. So we need to define a process to release special projects that, that participate in the simultaneous release, but they either A, do not include any Karaf features, or B, their artifacts are not built by auto-release. And there are some projects, for example, Yang IDE from AT&T, NextUI, Toolkit, Opflex, and VTN. And so we also need to define like a distribution mechanism. Like, do we define some mechanism so that we can pull in all their artifacts into the Karaf zip file? I know that VTN does this already. Or do we list it as a separate download in our download page? This is what Opflex and NextUI does at the moment. So I'd like the community to help define this new process.
Hello? Yeah, so I think it needs to be decided like based on project. Because for some projects, it makes sense that they're part of the simultaneous release, right? And then maybe it makes sense that their binaries are part of the Karaf zip. But for other projects, I feel doesn't make sense. Like for example, a Yang IDE, why does an IDE have to be part of a Beryllium release? Like as an end user using an IDE, I want the IDE to be released often so that I can take advantage of the latest features, right? And it's same with NextUI. NextUI is a JavaScript project. And I feel in the JavaScript world, 6 months is a long time to release your project, right? Like JavaScript projects tend to release like daily or even weekly. So I think the determination needs to be done on like a case-by-case basis for each project. And I think we need to make it more clear that they don't necessarily have to be part of the simultaneous release. I feel like a lot of projects come in and then they immediately think they need to be part of the simultaneous release in order to release anything, when sometimes it might actually be advantageous for them to be able to release outer stream.
Technically, any project can release their artifacts directly to Nexus if they were to write their own job to do so.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, we can thinking maybe we can push the participating SR release back to them to a full milestone instead of an zero. So people getting approved by a project by the repository, whatever, and then after M2, they will just still do M0, M2, but at M2 they will say whether they will participate in simultaneously.
Right. I think that's a good idea too, because in the last release, we've had several projects drop out at the end. But at the same time, they spent so much resources up to that point, right? Like there needs to be some, instead of just accepting every project right at the beginning, like some sort of time frame that they have to prove that they're going to be able to, right? Right. For auto release, I feel we just need to be able to build the, like
Whoever participated.
Yeah.
We shouldn't. So that's actually good. We don't need to worry about because we spend so much time at the beginning just for those projects to come out.
Right. It's actually more advantageous for auto release to build less projects at the beginning because we can make sure auto release is working. Because in the last time frame, we had Beryllium just not working until I think until like M4 or something before it even was buildable, right? Whereas if we started auto release with like controller and a few projects, and just to prove that auto release was able to successfully build, and then we add one project at a time, then we could troubleshoot why that project was failing. Whereas in the last cycle, we just kept getting one failure after another, and we had to fix them one at a time, and it took a really long time for us to get something working.
Existing project probably okay.
Yeah.
We have previous one. It's only for new projects. For new projects, maybe we should set up one, give them another check whether we want to participate at SR. If you participate at SR, one criteria is you have to be able to build that auto release.
Right.
Otherwise, we cannot be part of that.
Yeah, that and I also still think we also need to be more clear to projects that it's not a requirement to be part of simultaneous release, right?
We should
Yes.
not be the requirement.
Yeah,
I
and
think
by
it
not
would be a
being,
good idea
yeah.
to, run auto release from the
Right.
day.
yeah, exactly. And for some projects, it's way more advantageous for them to not even be part of simultaneous release, so they don't have to do any of those milestone things and like spend so much time doing all that stuff. Like for some projects, they're really simple and they could release out of stream. So,
If they don't participate, I think about M0 is nothing,
Right.
right? M1, they basically just get a PA or whatever, so they should
Right.
get that one. M2 is basically you have to get all those checklists, you have to repository or whatever. So M3 is really related with coding. You have the
Right.
function stack or whatever. So from M3, then they should think. So I don't know. I don't good or bad.
I think for Beryllium, we made the requirement that they have to build an auto release successfully in M4, if I recall correctly. And I think that was
yeah,
that
plus
was way
we
too
didn't
late.
have an auto release working for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And
So with the auto release working, if never happen, no? I mean, you can never break the auto release, right? So you're gonna be working all the time, or how does it's like that? Right?
Should work all.
It should always work, and then if there's a failure, someone has to report it to the project.
Okay.
But the problem with Beryllium was it never worked
Yeah.
before, so none of the projects could fulfill the part of saying that they passed auto release because auto release wasn't working.
And with your verified job, it's also very weird that someone can break as well, right? Or not really?
With the validate job, it helps a lot because it prevents our most common reason for projects breaking, which is they depended on the wrong version of an artifact. So that situation is fixed, except there's still other cases where,
Corner cases that could
yeah.
break the release. Okay. In any case, I think there are different things. There are projects that when they get to the close to the release, they drop because they are not ready. And there is another situation that he said that some project, it doesn't really make sense that they are even part of the simultaneous release because the kind of deliverable, the kind of thing they are doing, it doesn't fit very much with the simultaneous release process. And for that, and I don't know if Phil or you or someone can collect these few projects and send a mail to them. Can you reconsider being in the simultaneous release? Like, I mean, the kind of thing that you are doing, you are not like reporting milestone like anybody, or you are not really following the process. The thing is not really in the, for some reasons, and then maybe they reconsider. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think we can force anybody to drop
Well,
or anything.
We started something in Beryllium called the onboarding interview, where for all new projects we have a WebEx onboarding interview where we talk to them about what it means to participate in a simultaneous release, what the
Yeah.
requirements are, what the development requirements are, the milestone requirements are. And I think that one thing we need to do in the onboarding interview for Boron is to say, well, by the way, you don't actually have to participate in the
Yeah.
simultaneous release.
That's true.
Here are the benefits, here are the costs, and emphasize that they could still be a good citizen moving to mature. Can they move to core? But moving to mature, even if you don't participate in a simultaneous release.
Core, no, core is more.
I actually foresee integration test moving to core because they are a core project.
Depending what is understanding for core.
I'm just saying.
I haven't looked at the requirements for core, but
It's a hard sell to get a support project as a core or a one that's kind of on the edge. That's hard to say because core really is kind of
core.
it's core to the actual operation of the system, not necessarily the support of the system.
Okay.
I
So,
think
so,
core is
so, so,
very-
so that's a cost then. If they cannot move to core, if let's say Yang IDE cannot move to core, and that's
Well, no, I think core is a very, OpenDaylight Karaf specific thing. If your project has nothing to do with that, then core isn't really a word that means anything to you because in theory, if you're like a web framework, then you are a core, but not for the OpenDaylight Karaf distribution. You're a core for this web framework, right? Like it's very project specific, not really. It's not really like we call OpenDaylight a big project, but it's more like a tent for a bunch of projects, and an individual project can be core but outside of what we call like the distribution, right? Like they're a completely different project. They have their own like software, or maybe even maybe they're not even a Java project, right? Like it really depends.
Dependency-wise as
Yeah.
well. When you define core, it's like at least you have to have people consuming you and
Right.
be a well-known project or something like that as well.
Yeah, and I could foresee having multiple different categories of core, like,
Yeah.
right? Like if suddenly OpenDaylight had another project that was like a web framework for designing, I don't know, some website that like competing with Drupal or something, wouldn't parts of this new project also have like a core or maybe a support group, et cetera? Like they'll have their own level of things, right? But maybe that's out of scope of OpenDaylight, I don't know. But I'm just saying that's an example, right? Like if you bring a project, like Yang IDE, right? Like that's an IDE, right? That has nothing to do with OpenDaylight, but they might have their own core. Like these components need to work in order for the rest of the IDE to be able to operate, right?
Yeah, we never got this core discussion today, so you can see.
Yeah.
Anybody you ask is going to tell you a different story.
So going back, so to recap, some projects do not need to participate in the simultaneous release, and it shouldn't impact them in terms of getting to maturity. But for the projects that do decide to participate in the simultaneous release, should we define the process for how they should distribute their artifacts? Should we try to include it in the Karaf zip file like VTN has done? Or should we just kind of leave it open-ended per project basis like Opflex and NextUI? And I mean, like, should just kind of like asking the community here.
I think it really depends. It's really hard to say, right? Like, because like NextUI, which is a JavaScript project, that doesn't need to be in the Karaf distribution, and they could have their own download page somewhere. But like, I think VTN works very closely with the OpenDaylight Karaf project, or like that binary, right? Like, so for them, it does make sense to put their binaries are in there, because you need to install it to use the VTN component of OpenDaylight.
Actually,
Right.
within the project, we don't care with 8 hours.
Yeah.
8 hours is okay.
As long as it can be done.
But I think that we would like to see more reporting of whatever artifacts you have. The tests for these projects should report it as a part of the milestone, because I know that some projects simply requested the waiver and said, okay, well, now that I have a waiver, I don't have to. And because I'm not a Karaf feature, then there's no need to report the test results. And I think we should shift more towards, well, even if you're not a Karaf feature, and even if you do have a waiver, it would be nice to define some sort of test reports.
Yeah, I think tests you can do regardless of what component you are.
And I think option 2 is the one that require more attention. Like when we say this download page, we need to specify more. Like
Yeah, well, we need to be more clear on
more clear.
where it'll appear on the download page, right?
Well, right now what we do with Opflex and NextUI is towards the end of the RCs, I simply approach the project and say, hey, where's your final artifact? And then they would provide it to us, and then we would upload it, or Ton would upload it to
Right.
Nexus. And then also in M5, I also approached the project and asked them their progress on generating the final artifacts to make sure that they're moving towards that direction.
Right, I think we need to be more clear on that, because they don't actually need to give us the binaries to put it in Nexus, because they can put it in Nexus themselves with their own Jenkins job,
At least that.
right?
It's the minimum.
The main part is if they want to be as their own entry on when you go to opendaylight.org/downloads, if they want to be there, they have to contact, I think, Phil or Casey, and then they can put the link there.
Okay.
But outside of that, they can push to Nexus anytime they want, right? They can push a brand new release binary every week if they feel it. Right, so they won't get GPG sign at the moment, but
There must be a minimum requirement for these projects in OpenDaylight. Like at least your code should be in Git, and if you have some code there, at least build it and publish something.
Yeah.
Right? You don't do that minimum, what are you doing?
So there's two things, right? Like if I want to clarify what you just said. So there's one with uploading it to Nexus, and then the second, which is to have that link in the OpenDaylight downloads page.
yes.
Okay. The second question I have is, should the artifacts be built from the source code in Garrett? Because if we don't build it in Jenkins,
So if
then-
it's not built in our Jenkins, they can't upload to Nexus. It has to go through our Jenkins.
Yeah.
okay.
That should be a
That's actually a requirement of our environment. You cannot push to our Nexus system from outside. It must come from our Jenkins. Our Jenkins is the only thing that's allowed to push to Nexus.
Okay, gotcha.
So and our Jenkins won't build from code that's external to our Garrett.
Okay, because I remember the NextUI project, they simply provided us a zip, but I wasn't sure if that zip was generated by our Jenkins or not. I know with Opflex, they do generate it with Jenkins because they link to a merge job, and the artifacts are in that the Jenkins merge job.
Well, so for Next, they didn't build with auto release, but if they did build with auto release, it would have been released as part of auto release releasing.
Okay.
But in their case, I did make sure their binary came from our Garrett system.
Okay.
And for Offlex, they actually build
Yeah.
with Jenkins, and then they archive it in Jenkins, which personally I don't like. I think they should actually just push it directly to Nexus. But what they gave us was a link to the Jenkins build page that had the artifacts, and then we just put it in Nexus for them when they. But I think it's just the process wasn't clear, right? Like, they probably didn't understand that they could have pushed it to Nexus themselves.
Okay. But what about linking from the downloads page? Does that have to link to a location in Nexus? Or can it link to mycompany.com/downloads?
We're not going to host external to our environment.
Okay.
Yeah, as an open source project, it should be in the open source page. It shouldn't go to some other.
So it should go to Nexus. It
Our
should point to
Nexus system is designed specifically as our distribution point. So it's essentially downloads.opendaylight.org for all intents and purposes. If it's not there, we don't distribute it.
Okay. So whatever link that we put in the OpenDaylight downloads page should link back to some location in Nexus.
It should be in Nexus. It shouldn't be Jenkins. It shouldn't be the wiki. It should be in Nexus.
Okay. And for them to put it in Nexus, they should define their own jobs that uploads directly to Nexus.
If it's not part of the auto release, then they need an additional job that would actually do a release build instead, because right now everything does snapshots or some similar. Those ones are a little harder to say when they're not exactly always Java projects, but they would have to have a release job, and it would have to be somehow that they could trigger it, because we don't allow people to go into the Jenkins UI and click build.
Okay. Right. Any other comments from people? I'm not sure if this is the right forum to discuss this, but during the release of Beryllium, I realized that we probably need better tracking of weather items as it impacts other cross projects. Some sort of coordination, especially if you're doing any sort of refactoring or having dual implementations. For example, there's some discussion actually ongoing right now in this time period about the config subsystem to blueprint. So that would be an example of something that would affect multiple projects. So I'm not sure if we should define a better process with respect to release about updating the weather template so that we can better coordinate this. I don't know, any thoughts from people?
I actually think we need this dashboard we keep talking about once in a while, right? Like a place that all projects go to every day, and then it just gives you a report on what's happening that day, and you can click by release. So you can say, what's the weather like for Beryllium? And then it'll say, there are these bugs that people are tracking. This is the highlight. Because the way we have things right now, everything's all over the place. There's like a wiki page, but that wiki page has some links to a Google Docs spreadsheet somewhere. And if you don't know those links, then and then we also link to Jenkins sometimes. All the information is all over the place. If we just had one place where everyone could always go to, and for all of our release plans too, they're all different wiki pages that may or may not follow the same naming scheme.
Yeah.
Right. So unless you know the link to that, but if we had this dashboard page, we could just have, for this release, here is all the relevant information you can
Yeah,
you might need.
that was the goal of, I'm not sure if you were around when we had the odlrelease.appspot.com. There was a web portal where we were bringing in data from all over the place, from Bugzilla, from Jenkins, from Sonar, and bring it all together. And the goal was to bring all the information related to a release into one portal, but I think that kind of like didn't continue.
Yeah, well, it's development, right? Like someone has to work on that.
Yeah.
And as we know, everyone's so busy.
Yeah. I wanted to get also that board for some of the tests we are doing, and we get very, very common questions here, like, okay, how many switches are you testing? How many performance, flow per second, here, there. All this information is already there. But we don't have a dashboard today also to publish these results. So we need dashboard for few things that I can see now. And who has this project for dashboarding this time? The intern is George? George was here before.
Yeah. I think George is working on.
I think there was some
release
project
George-
internship for
yeah,
dashboarding.
Release dashboard. At the same time, I'm also working on a project management portal. So that's something that to streamline some of the work that I've done during release, like the integration matrix, having that automated with the script that I was talking about in the.
So this is a separate work, or you are working through this intern?
No, this is separate. So this is to
Separate,
automate
okay.
some of the release management task. And I think that the goal, originally the goal was just to have the integration matrix be populated automatically. But we can definitely like import a lot of the data from like Bugzilla,
Yeah.
also the data from the weather tracking. There's also APIs that will allow us to read the Google Docs spreadsheet. And pull in all the data from all the sources into one site and then publish it either through Maven sites or through some sort of web portal or something like that.
Yeah, we really need that framework. So I'll talk to George also to see. Yeah.
So another thing that we realized is that during the release review, we need to update the release review and release note templates to include more clarification on their classification of their features as experimental or user-facing, instead of asking during the actual release review. And also clarifying what it means to be compatible, and also their migration testing. It's not enough to say, oh, by the way, you can migrate from a previous release. We need projects to actually identify if they've done any sort of migration testing. It's okay to say no, but to have that clarification inside the release.
And this information, to be honest, is what you say here. You can maintain this information over time. Like you don't need to provide this one time when you're going to release review. But you can have what you say in your main project, in your main portal, or whatever page you have there, a report that's saying, okay, my feature is experimental today, migration issues, all this kind of thing could be, an ongoing kind of information more than one-time shot when you had to release.
Yeah. I'm going to skip the testing part because I think that you'll be discussing it in your session. So that's basically all I wanted to cover with the release. Is there anything anybody wanted to discuss with regards to the release? Any comments?
Yeah, I have the same point that you have there. We can start a little bit earlier by getting the RCs as well as experimental by default.
And I think
classify test cases is super important. So this is critical in this release. I think we cannot live anymore in this situation where we have an unstable test, we don't understand the test results. So we'll work on that very much.
I think you're just leading a discussion after this
Yes.
about this. So
we can tie it all together with the experimental thing. Like the condition to lead the experimental thing is like, okay, you have a stable test, you don't have failure unless you have a path for it. All these kind of conditions will be all together. Yeah.
all right. Thank you, everybody.